All right, so the first graph we're gonna look at is the PPC, production possibilities curve. So remember here, we're gonna put products on each side. So let's say this is consumer goods. So this is what gets purchased by us, the consumers. So that is part of consumption spending, of aggregate demand, and capital goods, which are purchased by firms. So this is part of investment spending. And then we can have constant opportunity costs because we have a constant slope. So for every, let's say, 2 units of consumer goods, we have to give up 2 units of capital goods. But that is not always going to be the case, right? So we can also have a concave or bowed out PPC, which shows an increasing opportunity cost. So here we could actually have specific values, like 80 and 40, and then good B and good A. All right, so where can we see this? Because this shows our maximum production, right? So let's say this is 100 and this is 80, meaning we can either produce 100 consumer goods or 80 capital goods, not both. So what is our maximum production? That is sustainable. This is what we see in our LAS graph. So let's say we draw this here, SIS. Why is this upward sloping? Sticky wages. So then never forget to label your axes, price level, and real GDP, because it shows us what we're producing, right? Anything that is new, anything that is a final good, or and it must be produced within the borders of this country in that year. Okay. All right, so let's put our aggregate demand here. Now what can we say? Our current output, Y1, is below our potential output, meaning our actual unemployment rate is greater than our natural rate of unemployment, because our actual GDP is less than our potential GDP. So these are the same. Don't forget to label it here, PL1. Now, let's say the government is going to intervene, fiscal policy. So what is the government going to do? Either increase government spending or decrease taxes. What is the Fed going to do? Monetary policy. So either reserve requirement down, because now banks have to put less money in required reserves, meaning that leaves more of demand deposits that can be put into excess reserves, and therefore money supply increases. We're assuming whenever there's more money in the economy, people will spend more money. Or discount rate down. Remember, that is the rate that the Fed charges banks for overnight loans. So if banks have to pay less, they can, it's an arrow down. So now they can charge us lower interest rates, and therefore we are more willing to take out loans. Or buy bonds, which is, remember, open market operation. Because then they will give banks money, 100% of that can be put into excess reserves that can be loaned out, therefore money supply increases. Meaning we can draw the corresponding money market graph. So here, quantity of money. It is not sufficient to just put quantity, so always put the product that we're looking at and the nominal interest rate. Now in this scenario, we said money supply will increase, right? Because we want more money in the economy to stimulate it. I1, I2, meaning now we have a lower interest rate, so a result would be investment spending goes up, meaning aggregate demand goes up. So price level and real GDP up, and the actual unemployment rate down. How can we show that in the graph? With a right shift of the aggregate demand curve. So for the money market graph, remember it's a nominal interest rate because it shows us the opportunity cost of holding cash, because you have to see the money demand curve as the demand for cash. So if we decide to hold cash, we are foregoing the interest we could be earning on an interest-bearing account, such as a savings account, and this is why that is the price that we pay for holding cash. Now, but this is only for monetary policy, because remember, only the Fed is in charge of the money supply. So now let's look at the government. Expansionary fiscal policy will usually lead to an increase in interest rate because the government is not in charge, right? So normal interest rate, I'm going to abbreviate it here, but on the exam, please write it out, okay? So now, more production, right? So more workers, meaning we need more money. Higher aggregate price level, that is also a shifter of the money demand curve, because if everything costs more, how are we going to pay for it? But then remember, we see this as the demand for cash. So let's say people decide to use credit cards instead, that would actually decrease the money demand curve. So basically anything that causes us to have more or less demand for cash shifts the MD curve. Whenever the Fed does something, that shifts the money supply curve. Now, government spending. If the government decides to spend more money, does the government actually have more money to spend? Not necessarily. Therefore, we can connect the loanable funds market. So here, we're going to look at the real interest rate because we are interested in how much we're actually going to pay. Real interest rate, quantity loanable funds, and then it works just like any other supply and demand graph. Q, L, F1, and R1. So now in this scenario, the government has an increased demand for loans because the government decides to spend more money. So DLF1, DLF2, SLF. So now we can see higher real interest rate. But usually on the exam, they will ask you about the nominal or real interest rate, so you already have a hint which graph to use. Or, so what did we say? What do we use to supply loans? We need savings. So in this scenario, if the government spends more money, that means government budget deficit, debt goes up. So therefore, the supply of loanable funds goes down. But, or, all right? So either or. Whenever you only have one scenario, you can only have one shift, not a double shift, okay? So here, supply of loanable funds only shifts if there is a change in savings, either domestic or foreign. Because these are our either capital inflows or outflows. And then remember, funds move where interest rates are highest. So money moves to high interest rate countries. given that the country is politically and economically stable. So even though we have high interest rate, let's say in Venezuela, it would not be seen as a safe haven for investments, and therefore people would still not bring their money over there. But let's work with that example. Let's say this is the US, we have higher real interest rates. What is going to happen now? Real interest rates attract foreign investments or investors because they want to earn the high interest. So let's draw this. Let's say we're talking about Canadians. So that would be cut per USD. So here we would put USD, quantity, USD, again, basic supply and demand because the currency is just like any other product. Q1, E1. So what would happen? We would have more demand. Q2, E2. So now value up, which also means value of Canadian dollars down. Or the supply of USD will go down because domestic investors will keep money in the US to earn the high interest rate. Okay, so now you can see we have almost all graphs here. What is missing? The Phillips curve.